Today we have our first update on the ULM tanks, and someone's going to win a Neptune dose. Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv Investigates Tank Trials, where we put reefing products, methods, and systems to the test, where we get to explore all kinds of methods of reefing, even create new ones, and then test them so we can all learn from those experiences before applying them to our home display tanks. In this case, the goal is a stable, show caliber reef tank which requires as little maintenance as possible, potentially performing only a few minutes of maintenance a month. So I gotta tell you that we nailed it with one of the tanks. All this can just take a few minutes a month. However, not in every case. What you're going to see today is probably the most valuable episode to date, because I'm not just going to talk about our successes, but I'm also going to show you what our biggest failure to date is as well. A real depiction of what's going on, and sharing what not to do is often more valuable than sharing what to do. So in that spirit, straight up, one of these tanks nailed it, the other one's okay, and the other I call a complete crash. There's always some mystery when things don't go the way you want them to, but I think I have one pretty solid answer here, and maybe the most important lesson we can share. Many of the lessons that you've learned from a multi-year stable tank just don't apply to a brand new tank. So let's start off with the most successful tank first, because I think it'll be easier to understand the challenges after. The simplest of the tank designs is absolutely thriving. All the zoanthids are open, growing, and look really healthy. I'm pretty sure we're going to see almost complete coverage in a matter of months. And we started with just these tiny little frags of each. There's been a lot of growth. Just as a refresher, this was the simplest design of them all. Just a 20 long glass tank as a sump. We didn't even bother with baffles. Pair of heaters, couple of redundant AC CHA return pumps, an auto top off, and a very low cost somatic skimmer. This combo is at the core of every basic tank design out there, and amongst the cheapest ways to set up proper filtration. In the tank itself, the flow is only on the bottom with a pair of MP10s on the back near the base of the rock and a bare bottom tank. This has also worked out really well. Not only do I see 0 cords in or outside the tank, but I can also barely even see the pumps in the tank. When feasible, the vortex in the back really is many reefers' ideal design, because the cords and equipment only take away from the visual appeal of a tank, never add to it. So from a ULM perspective, it worked out really well as well. There's no sand to keep clean, which reduces maintenance, and having the pumps at the bottom of the tank absolutely keeps the bottom clean. There are small pockets which do collect some detritus or bits of rock, but it's easy to clean for sure. While I do like the look of sand, it's a trade-off I'm personally willing to make on any tank where lower maintenance is a critical component of system design. Having 3 tanks in my office, that's certainly the case here. The Kessel light is also performed as intended. Turn it on, tune it to the visual color I like, and never look back. Lastly, the auto feeder has also kept the fish happy. I still feed some Macari algae pellets by hand every day, but if I miss, the auto feeder makes sure that they're always getting fed and staying happy. In the end, this tank only requires a tiny bit of effort each month. Clean the glass every few days when it gets dirty, empty the skimmer cup once a week, fill the feeder once a month or so, then mix some salt water for the auto water changes. I'd call this a major success from a ULM perspective, and I'd say if ultra low maintenance is your goal and a tank that looks awesome but doesn't take over your life, then I got 2 solid pieces of advice. A softy, mushroom, and zoanthid tank is the right type of coral theme for a ULM. They just have so few demands, and acceptable chemistry is so easy to maintain, meaning the system design can also be very low cost and simple. You can also use technology to make them easier like we did in this case. I'd say auto water changes are probably the single best option for someone looking for a ULM and can implement something like this. So about every year I come across something that I just can't live without, and this is 2018's. I'm never going to haul around another bucket of water in my life. It's my least favorite part of reef tank maintenance, and because of that, the most likely piece of maintenance that gets ignored when my life or work gets hectic. The strong water change system on this tank means a few things. I'll never worry about salinity, never worry about undesirable levels of nutrients. While they won't be perfect, never worry about trace elements being way off in a tank like this. With softy and polyps, I really don't need to worry about calcium and alkalinity to a great degree either. I guess I do test a couple times a month and make a single correction, but that's it. If I use some 2-part on dosers, I could probably get rid of that too. So the simple design, simple corals, and limited work to achieve the results is what's making this ULM tank run so well. This is a good point to mention when reefers are sharing our experiences. It's always helpful to show the tanks that our experiences are producing, because while this method worked out awesome on this tank, it would not have worked out as well on an SPS tank, which requires more effort into calcium and alkalinity as well as general stability. So matching advice with desires is worth the effort. Okay, in that spirit, what about the other two ULM tanks? Well, they didn't do as well, and I just gotta say, I think one of the more important lessons here is all tanks are not the same, and some tank types are just easier. If you're looking for a tank that's going to be ultra low maintenance from day one, then that softy mushroom and polyp-based tank will probably be the easiest way to achieve that, and an SPS tank will likely be the most challenging, at least in the beginning. That's an almost universally true statement. So in the end, the SPS tank is what I would call a complete crash, and the LPS tank just is doing okay. They both have degenerated over time. We could have certainly stopped that degeneration at any time, completely changed courses, and saved most of the corals. But this isn't a home display tank, it's tank trials where we're making concerted efforts to a specific goal with specific approaches. I just don't think that we would have learned as clear of lessons if we changed things all the time. Just as a reminder, with these two ULM tanks, we were attempting to use fuges as a primary nutrient export and only perform water changes when ICP testing told us chemistry was way off. This attempt is largely because we had some really awesome results with a similar approach on the 160. We already had success with Triton, so why not try a variant of that success and apply those lessons to these ULM tanks? The variance plan didn't work out, but just before we make some changes and give it another go, it's time to learn, reflect, and adapt. But again, the first step of that is to identify the potential causes, or at least what we think caused the challenges. First, we looked for pests under a 4K macro lens and did find some random cool bugs, but nothing even resembling an infestation that was actively going after new flesh. All the chemistry was spot on using both in-house testing as well as ICP. We checked PAR. Everything is well within safe zones, and in the end, there just isn't a direct gotcha cause. So what is it? Well, I have to say there's just something to the concept that SPS corals thrive on stability, and I just think there are changes going on in a brand new tank that are hard to account for. That said, I've set up a whole slew of what I would call insta-tanks, where we cycle the tanks well and then add a ton of corals. This is the first time that that's not gone well in two tanks. So if you have no direct gotcha issues like this, it's just time to look at the most significant differences between what you've done in the past and this time. There are two very clear standouts, and that's relying on ICP for water change instructions, as well as cycling the tank with the fuge operational day one. So first, I have to say that while ICP test gives the best window into water chemistry that we've had to date, it isn't giving you an entire picture of everything going on in the tank, some of which we're likely to never understand completely. I think this is particularly true in a brand new tank, where there's all kinds of biological and nutritive stabilizing events that are happening as well. So in the end, while there are different approaches and methods that work very well on established tanks, I just don't think that there's a replacement for water changes on a brand new tank. Water changes just work to help avoid any number of issues, many of which you'll never know were legit possibilities because a decent initial water change schedule simply help you avoid almost all of them by default. Related to that, having the Carbo in the tank day one was done to control nutrients from day one and get the tank cycled around that component of the filtration, but we had more challenges with that than we had successes. For a while, the Carbo just didn't want to grow. Algae like this also uptakes ammonia, so it could interfere with the bacterial cycle to some degree as well. In the end, this is just a variable I'd like to remove from a brand new tank or the cycle process and phase the fuge in after the tank is showing signs of biological stability and there's a base of nutrients for the algae. Okay, so this is tank trials and we're going to find success here with an ultra low maintenance tank, I promise. Even an SPS tank, we just have to accept that there might be some speed bumps. In the end, I think we just got too cute with this and made it more complicated than it needs to be with too much theory. So what we're going to do is make 3 changes here predominantly based on the successes from the 1 ULM. First, I think it's time to just accept that water changes are going to be part of a young tank's life. That might not be the case for everyone, but probably for most. So ULM is more about how, not if. But we can likely scale back that effort as time goes on. In that spirit, selecting a reasonably sized tank will be a big ULM component up front. Best practice being those small weekly water changes, largely because there's minimal impact to chemistry, but also because they're so small, they're easy to perform, and water changes don't need to be heated. I would like to note that the BRS-160 was started on 10 to 50% water changes as part of Zeovit, and the one thing you'll learn from an upcoming series we're doing with the Worldwide Coral team is the 10 to 15% weekly water changes are at the core of what they do and their success as well. So a single bucket water change in a system like this is not a big deal, but this is called ULM, so we're going to put these tanks on 3% daily auto water changes, meaning all we need to do is mix up some water once a month and let the Neptune dose do the rest. meaning I can perform a really strong water change schedule in all 3 tanks in an extremely stable manner with 5 minutes of work a month, which I gotta say is ULM all the way. For those of you that don't own an Apex, the Auto Aqua water change system may work well for you. Tyler really likes his here, and they get solid reviews from those that use them. In the spirit of making things even easier over time and reach similar goals as our first attempt, we may scale the water changes back over time, maybe 2% a day in a year and 1.5% a day in 2 years to match the decreasing reliance that many tanks have as they become naturally more stable. Second, I'm going to completely change out 100% of the water and then put the fuge on hold until the tank's biologically stable and then add the fuge in at a later date. I'm not going to say that starting with the fuge is a bad idea, but based on this experience, I just think it's wiser to let the tank stabilize first. Lastly, the method of dosing precise amounts of saturated kelp from the kelp reactor proved to be really easy. The strength was consistent and worked exactly as intended. My only concern is knowing exactly when the kelp solution needs to be replaced, and being worried about that isn't ULM. So on the SPS tank, we're just going to switch to a pair of dosing pumps and BRS 2-part. The only reason we didn't do that in the first place is because the excess salinity of the 2 parts can have unlimited water change environments. This is just not an issue now that there's an auto water change environment. In the end, ULM often means just going with what you know produces results, and the BRS 2-part has done that for tens of thousands of reefers over a decade. With the LPS tank, we're going to try something new because frankly, this wouldn't be tank trials if we didn't try something new. We're going to try out Tropic Marine's Carbo calcium. For those who don't know, I believe this is based on calcium formate and one of the few options out there that can add both calcium and alkalinity in a single additive. But in this case, it comes in concentrations similar to 2 parts, doesn't have excess salinity additions, and even adds a small amount of organic carbon to keep nutrients down. Really a cool approach to an all-in-one product, and we'll get to see the results of how it works here. For those of you looking for a bit more info on the Carbo calcium, Randy should have a spotlight on it in the fairly near future. Related to that, we're also going to give Tropic Marine's pharmaceutical-grade Pro Salt in our auto water changes a try as well. After all this talk about the benefits of pharmaceutical-grade additives that we've done in the last couple months, it was just too compelling to not try out a salt that is clearly labeled as using pharmaceutical-grade ingredients. So related to those water changes, why have we never implemented auto water changes here before or really spent a lot of time talking about them? I guess the main reason is prior to the Neptune dose, it was often a fairly complex series of float switches and containers, and it seemed like more hassle than it was really worth. However, now, just 1 tube to your saltwater bin and 1 to the drain, and you're done. I guess auto water changes are also not the most efficient use of salt as well, but I guess I'm more concerned about achieving legit, consistent results and saving a few bucks in salt a month. In the end, this approach doesn't just reduce the workload of owning a reef tank, but also almost certainly increases success rates and avoidance of many common issues. Since I think a lot of reefers are interested in this, but not sure it can be done easily, I'm going to share 3 ways to get this done very easily. This is all done via the Neptune dose for us, but you could use other dosing pumps or the Auto Aqua solution if you wanted. We use the Neptune dose because it's capable of very long runs and the easiest to install and perform. Our water storage is a few rooms away from here, so it's certainly the best solution for us. First, the install we did here was just route some tubes to the other room where the water storage is. Most of us don't want loose tubing laying around, so we put a hole in the wall and routed the tubes through the ceiling. If you can't do that, you can use these cord hiders available at almost any hardware store and run the tubes along the baseboards. Once you paint them, they blend in really well. We use them in my office here to the ceiling in another corner. You can also go through the floor into a crawl space or basement and run the tubes under the floor. And in mild climates, you can even run them outside. Okay, number 2, what if none of that is possible? Well, we can do the next best thing and just turn the auto water change into a push button water change, meaning that all you need to do is carry some 1/4-inch tubing to the sink and wherever your water storage is and the tank, then tell the dose to perform the water change by hitting the appropriate feed or maintenance mode button. When it's done, the only step is to put the 1/4-inch tubing away, which is much easier than other solutions that are heavy and constantly kink. The push-button water changes with the dose do operate over a 24-hour period, so nice and slow where the water doesn't need to be heated or anything. You just have to be okay with a couple of small tubes being out for a day and some noise associated with the pump running fairly fast. Lastly, for a third method, you can pick up a chest or something similar and put it next to the tank with some water containers, throw a decorative rug on top, and it will look like it belongs there. This is also a solid option for auto top-offs. This will give the benefits of slow, automated water changes, but you do still need to fill and empty the container, so not the best ULM option of the three. If you do want a chest or footstool like this, I find Home Goods to be one of the more affordable options to locate one, and they're in most markets. Last piece I'm going to throw in on this is I've been reefing for a long time, and in that time ruined more than my fair share of hardwood floors with just the accumulation of small splashes from the tank onto the floors during maintenance. With the auto water changes, we have eliminated 90% of the causes of splashed saltwater. So in the end, a $300 pump is going to save me a ton of hassle and money by helping me protect my floors and my living space from my hobby. Okay, so we're going to implement those changes and then of course report the results as time goes on. In the meantime, I know one of you wants to win that dose, so click the link in the lower left and head on over to the site and click on specials and deals and then free stuff to sign up. Next week, I think that we'll have an update on the BRS Clown Harem tank, which even though it wasn't really called that, is really the original tank trials and should be fun. If you like what we're doing here, let us know with a thumbs up and then subscribe because we release new reefing content every week. See you next week with another episode of BRStv.